When I think of Korean term mother tongue, it feels fitting because of its connotation of ancestry and familial ties. Being born and raised in New York City and having very limited contact with Koreans, I learned Korean as an oral tradition, listening and repeating the sounds of my family. Although I know how to read, I write in a purely phonetic way, sounding out each syllable like a first grader and making my best guess. As I only spoke Korean at home and during childhood summers spent with my grandparents in Korea, it never became mine. It was always something I had borrowed. The ways that I express humor or sarcasm, idioms and slang are merely attempted imitations of my parents. People often ask me if I'm fluent. The short answer is no, but if I have time, I explain that I can fluently have general conversation. Conversations that you would have with your family, but I cannot understand government announcements or academic writing. However, the insular manner in which I learned Korean made me feel fluent. If I can understand virtually everything that my parents want to express to me, how much more do I need to know? When I know I cannot boast the status of fluency, I attempt to hide behind my accent. This summer, when I visited my grandparents in Korea, my grandmother passed me the phone to say hello to a friend or perhaps a distant family member. Within a few exchanges of words, the voice on the other end of the line was thoroughly impressed with my Korean. She sounds like someone from here. My grandmother took great delight in hearing this. That same summer, I came home one day to my grandparents and an unexpected guest. Caught off guard, I stumbled slightly on my greeting. She doesn't speak Korean well. He stated this as a fact. Although the term mother tongue invokes a true love I feel towards my family and heritage, this love is often unrequited and fickle. Rather than love, it often feels like a bondage, one that can subject me to exile and acceptance within the same sentence. To speak is to be judged. Although it seems as if I've only recognized this fact now, I believe I've always felt it in my throat. It is the reason that when white girls at my middle school would ask me to say something in Korean, I bent the syllables to make it sound as soft and pleasing to the Western ear as possible. It's the reason that when the Korean children at my grandfather's church asked me to say something in English, I stayed silent until a boy threw a ball at my face. I believe that it is for this reason my parents have always been hesitant to applaud my Korean. Do you really think you'll be able to survive in Korea? In their imagination of my return to the motherland, to speak is to survive. From an early age, it became clear to me that my exophony was a topic of fear, survival, and judgment when it ventured outside the borders of the private home. In the past, I've anxiously asked my mother if I have an American accent when I speak Korean. A little. It's not really an accent, it's more of a hesitation. Recently, I found three old home videos while browsing through my laptop. I'm around 2.5 years old. In the videos, my parents speak to me and alternate from Korean to English. I respond in a voice that is unrecognizable to me now for a number of reasons. Aside from my infant timbre and tone of absolute confidence, I noticed that I responded back to them in Korean with an accent different, better than the one that I possess now. At first, I dismissed the idea that my Korean could be in any way better when I was younger. After all, I had spent much of my high school years attempting to expand my vocabulary through K-dramas and interacting with the Korean kids at my school. However, my mother noted this too when I showed her the videos, affirming my fear that I had already lost what I had been striving to achieve, the native accent. In Theresa Cha's dictee, she writes about the brain in relation to speech, dreams, memory, and the physical organs that allow speech. In a poetic form that resembles what some might consider to be broken English, Cha writes, not possible to distinguish the speech exhaled, affirmed in exhalation, exclaimed in inhalation, to distinguish no more the rain from dreams or from breaths. Tongue inside, the mouth inside, the throat inside, the lung organ alone, the only organ, all assembled as one, just one. The writing is followed by several anatomical diagrams that include the air passages, larynx, and lungs. She follows these diagrams with more writing that emulates the act of speech. The last three lines read, stop, start, where proper pauses were expected. but no more. Although Cha's writing often feels elusive to me, I resonate deeply with the feelings she evokes in her visceral portrait of speech. The stops, the starts, the stutters, and the swallows. Sometimes I speak and know that I am wrong, and this is more difficult than being oblivious to my faults. I repeat the words, changing the syllables slightly until it is consistent with my memory of what sounds correct. I've recorded my own speaking voice so that I can be my own judge, shifting tones to become more like my mother than myself. I understand the frustration of my own mouth failing me. My tongue, my mouth, and my lungs are assembled as one. Yet I cannot seem to control its system. I cannot distinguish the sounds of my mouth from dreams or memories. Although I inhabit the same body, mind, and mouth, I cannot return to my toddler self and the physical abilities she once possessed, for my body has forgotten now. In an essay discussing Theresa Cha for the Yale Review, Professor Ken Chen states, exiled from her mother tongue and writing in a neo-colonial lingua franca, she wrote as if the condition of language is failure. It is this failure that I'm ultimately familiar with in regards to the mother tongue. Through Cha's words, this recognition of a visceral failure provoked an honest reflection of myself in relation to specifically my father's parents. I had always known that I wasn't a very good granddaughter to them, yet I was simultaneously comforted by the belief that I was the favorite grandchild among my cousins, a superlative that I strongly attribute to my ability to speak Korean. My grandparents have no knowledge of English, and both their children decided to live in the United States and raise children who speak English and bad Korean, imperfect speakers. Yet in the process, they too have been made imperfect speakers. Their lineage is made up of more English speakers than Korean now. Subject to physical and linguistic exile, we are mutually outsiders to each other. Since they have grown too old to visit the United States, our relationship consists mostly of short phone calls on holidays and birthdays. My father nags me about calling them more often, but the thought of doing so has always deeply unsettled me. The pressure of communicating with them solely through speech fills me with a unique dread and avoidance that I have been unable to place until meeting the words of Yi Yun Lee. In her essay, To Speak is to Blunder, but I Venture, Lee describes why she disowned her native language. Like all intimacies, the intimacy between one and one's mother tongue can be comforting and irreplaceable, yet it can also demand more than what one is willing to give, or more than one is capable of giving. These demands are what haunts me in our phone calls. Once, while talking to my grandfather, he could not understand what I was trying to say. Perhaps I had mixed up a syllable or used an incorrect tense, mutilating my words. I cannot remember if I tried to repeat myself or froze with the fear that repeating myself would only reaffirm that I was incomprehensible. Either way, I felt that there was a mutual recognition of our immeasurable distance from each other that not even language could salvage. It is the repetition of this moment I fear the most. The awkward silences reflect a boundary that neither of us can cross. However, I understand the pain that my avoidance may cause my grandparents, for, as Lee says, I am not the only casualty in this war against myself. But somehow I cannot help it. Although I can bear my own exile from the Korean language, I think perhaps I strive to shield my grandparents from this pain. Nabokov once said, one's grief belongs to oneself, one's tragedy to others. To reveal my failure is to turn my grief into their tragedy. However, during the last 2 summers, I've had to confront a different kind of tragedy as my grandmother's dementia has worsened. She repeats stories incessantly and asks questions that have already been answered. When I visited her last summer, my uncle and my grandfather had a huge quarrel that resulted in my uncle leaving the house and spending the night at a hotel. My grandmother sobbed, fearing that my uncle would force my cousins to leave home too. A week later, she did not remember that this had happened. In the same way that my tongue has lost its memory of the native accent, my grandmother's memory is failing her. Language is losing its meaning. What I say to her quickly dissipates as if I had never opened my mouth. The burdens of my exophony feel weightless in the face of her dementia. My blunders are easily forgiven and forgotten. However, I long to feel that weight again, although my exophony is imbued with the stakes of judgment, survival, and failure. It is more importantly rooted in a deep familial love that English does not carry. As much as I resonate with Theresa Cha's displacement and exile, I resonate more with her inability to let go of Korea, no matter how much pain she might feel doing so. Ken Chen states, rather than reading Decipher as a riddle to be solved, we must look for its pleasures, the foremost of which is love. My grandmother's memory loss has forced me to consider the listening ears of love, deaf to my failing words and imperfect accent. This summer, I went to the post office to run an errand for the magazine I was interning at in Soho. An old Asian man who seemed to be around my grandfather's age was working the kiosk. Hearing his accent, I knew that he was Korean. He asked for my identification and I handed him my Korean ID. He smiled and we conversed in Korean and he praised my accent. I blundered, to which he would clarify in English. He brought me to where I could purchase stamps and introduced me as his friend to his coworker. These loving ears are why I still crave to speak Korean and even subject myself to the judgment that comes with it. I'm delighted by the familiarity of the foreign Korean accent. I wish to hear my parents' voices in conversations in the street. I hope to hear them in my own voice. I look for my grandparents among strangers at the post office. I sometimes venture crossing that uncertain boundary between home and the scrutiny of the public eye, because ultimately, to speak is to love.